You're tuned in, tuned up, and ready to go. Welcome to Ria's Ham Shack, a weekly conversation about amateur radio, shortwave listening, and radio tech, hosted by Ria Jairam, N2RJ, and heard weekly on WRMI Legends Shortwave. And now, here's your host, Ria.
Boy, do I ever love the weekend, and I always kick off my weekends on Fridays on 5050 kilohertz on WRMI, and also I believe 5950, so you have another frequency to listen to. I believe the propagation's a little different, the antenna beam's a little different, right here on WRMI Legends, Radio Miami International, and of course brought to you by our fabulous friends Ted, Randall, Holly, and also Jeff White and his entire crew at WRMI Radio there in Okeechobee, Florida. Yeah, hoping to go down there sometime and probably take some videos. We'll see, but I'll definitely keep you posted. This week I'm going to introduce a new way you can get news from Ria's Ham Shack, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Actually, we're going to do it in the first commercial break, and I'm going to tell you about the 6-meter band and what we need to do to preserve it and why we need to have access to that spectrum. We'll also take your questions and answers, and I'll give you a sneak peek of what's going on at Dayton Hamvention with me. So how's it going? I am Ria. My call sign N2RJ. If you'd like to get a QSL card from the show, you can do so via email, ria@n2rj.com. I'm having some new ones printed, and you can also send a mail to P.O. Box 73, that's P.O. Box 73, Sussex, Sierra Uniform Sierra Sierra Echo X-Ray, New Jersey 07461. Okay, and that's the United States. All right, we'll be right back. Ria's Ham Shack now has a weekly newsletter on Substack. Yes, Substack is a great platform to share news and views and other stuff. So if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, go to n2rj.substack, that's substack.com, n2rj.substack.com. You can subscribe to the newsletter, and then you can also see various little things I post there. I even have this show on the podcast, but of course it comes out later after it airs on WRMI. But you can check out the news at n2rj.substack.com, and it has a concise summary. You can share it with your friends and bring them on board to Ria's Ham Shack. That's n2rj.substack.com, n2rj.substack.com, and be sure to subscribe, and I will see you there. So now that you've heard about my Substack, I'm actually going to read to you an editorial that I published on the Substack, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about why this is important. So in the last newsletter, and of course if you haven't gotten a newsletter, you can get it from Substack, we outlined proposed changes to the amateur 60-meter allocation. Some of the proposals greatly reduce our privileges on the band, a shockingly low power limit of 15 watts, and this is EIRP, meaning take into account antenna gain, is also being proposed. The upshot is that we would gain a continuous allocation, one not boxed into 5 channels as the current allocation is. However, our current allocation allows 100 watts, which allows communications even in bad conditions. As an amateur radio DXer, radio experimenter, and I'm always an advocate for as much spectrum access as possible. But there is more to this than simply more spectrum. The 15-watt limit stings. It seems like a downgrade from other bands. With that said, modulation techniques today make it more useful than in times past. 60 meters is also shared with the federal government. Several entities have touted this feature as being helpful in emergencies, as it gives us direct interoperability with government agencies in time of disaster. Interoperability is a brutal lesson we learned in the aftermath of the September 11 attacks, where multiple agencies could not communicate with each other, and ham radio operators as licensed trained communicators should have the ability to communicate when needed. Emphasis on when needed. Alaska even has an emergency frequency somewhere in there. If you've ever been to Alaska, you will quickly realize that much of it is without infrastructure. As such, radio bridges the gap, especially in emergencies such as earthquakes and weather events. Radio spectrum allocation to ham radio is rare. In fact, we are losing much of it at a rapid rate as 5G and other technologies swallow up anything they can find with hobbyists low down on the totem pole. Prior to 60 meters, the last allocation we had was the walk bands in the early 1980s. This was a huge win for us, and we later won with the 60 meter allocation in the mid 2000s. Some may complain about FT8 in the channels, and the 60 meter channels, but its activity and its use of the band. Therefore, we shouldn't discourage it. But I think with the continuous allocation, we now have the opportunity to move that activity down to another space at low power. It is a weak signal mode after all, to free up room for voice and other modes. I would like for us to keep full access to the channels we have, but perhaps move the FT8 and other digital activity off of them and onto the new allocation. Since other countries have this allocation, it would make sense. I encourage you to write thoughtful comments when the FCC opens comments in support of this proposal. Explain our role and why access to the band is important, not just EMCOM emergency communications, but all the other parts of basis and purpose. So, my friends, yes, as you know, if you watch on the YouTube channel, I outlined what's happening with 60 meters. So we're not losing the band. First of all, we're not losing the band. What is happening is that the ITU has authorized, recommended a worldwide allocation of 15 kilohertz, and that allocation is at 15 watts. And this is not just 15 watts out of your transmitter, it's 15 watts EIRP, meaning that 15 watts taken into account the antenna gain. I think this and with a dipole, that's essentially you're looking at less than 10 watts. This kind of puts us in line with CB radio. CB radio has channels, okay? But this is a continuous allocation, but the power level puts us in line with CB radio. I think for the most part, it's probably going to be a hard sell to do any kind of voice communication on that band, long distance DX. You could do low power QRP, but let's face it, life's too short for QRP. I enjoy high power operation. I don't really do too much QRP except when I'm portable. So I don't think we should be forced into that. The other thing is, of course, this band is useful for emergency communications as it is an interoperable band with the federal government in the US. Now, of course, other countries have this continuous allocation. Canada actually has both the channels and the continuous allocation, and the FCC did note that. The FCC said that, Canada has both, and it has it at 100 watts. So I think we should definitely have the 100 watts, and I think we should have that privileges. At the same time, I do think that FT8 probably needs to move down to the new continuous allocation and probably a lower power because, FT8 really doesn't need that high power. It doesn't really need that high power. As I noted in my video, the ARRL actually lobbied for this position, and I fully agree with them. I do think that the ARRL is right in this scenario. So kudos to them. And it is one thing I will say, on this station we talk a lot about the ARRL, and it is one of the things that they should be, more focused on. I think it's great that we have advocates in Washington. My friend who is a FCC lawyer for the ARRL, David Siddall, he is a very, very good lawyer in terms of communications and the whole FCC in Washington scene. So we're very lucky to have him on board. And he was one of the results of the great election in the ARRL of 2018, where we turned 4 seats and had 4 new directors, including myself. I fear that the ARRL is going to regress some of that change, and I think we're going to go a little backwards. So, I support the ARRL, but at the same time, I do think there needs to be some serious leadership changes so that we keep the ARRL strong and we keep our ability to lobby in Washington. As much as people like to say that I'm dropping my membership and it's not worth it and, this, that, and the other, I do think that there is nobody else who does what the ARRL does in terms of this lobbying. as the problems they have in terms of politics, and they do have some problems with politics, let me tell you. And you know who is in charge of the politics there, right? We talk about him a lot on this radio station. And frankly, we need some change there. But the ARL is necessary, and I will continue to support the ARL as a life member. And of course, I'm going to support it as a watchdog, because I need to definitely keep an eye on them. And I will always be fully supportive of them, but like a good, kind of like parents, they love their kids, but they got to spank them sometimes. Well, maybe not today, but, they got to show them some discipline. And that is what I think. So there is more to come, folks. Speaking of Dayton Hamvention, I will be at Dayton Hamvention. I'll be hanging out all over. I'm going to be at a number of different places. I'm going to be hanging out with my friends. Of course, I'll be at the ARDC booth where I am. And the show is not sponsored by the ARDC, but I have to acknowledge that I will be there. Also, I will be doing some... I'll be hanging out with the Legends there. And if you want a copy of the book, too, my book, you're more than welcome to visit us at the Legends, and we'll have copies available for you, signed copies, right? And, you come and say hello. You'll say hello to me, you'll say hello to Ted, you'll say hello to Holly and the rest of the crew at WRMI Legends. Okay, my friends? Yeah, and it really, I really hope that we can save ham radio and the ARL. I just, it's just, I guess it's kind of in your hands as members now. So enough about that. I mean, there's been other stuff going on. Have you seen the Northern Lights? That was pretty amazing. I did talk about it in the Substack, but there were lots of photos of different Northern Lights, aurora, showing up as far south latitudes as New York. And I saw a little bit of it in New Jersey, but I really didn't have the time to look. So that's pretty interesting. Of course, it caused loads of radio blackouts, and of course, you as shortwave listeners would know that. Okay. All right. Well, let's take a break and come right back with the news. So, one of the great things about having an HF radio is the ability to work DX. But you need to know where you can find this DX. And you can actually find all the latest news, tips, tricks, scuttlebutt, and on-the-scene reports at dx-world.net. That's dx-world.net. My friend Call and his fabulous crew of correspondents bring you all the latest DX news from around the world right into your ham shack. Okay, so check out dx-world.net, and they also supply the news here on Ria's Ham Shack. So if you want to get the source of the news, you go to dx-world.net. That's dx-world.net. All right, so this week's news we're going to actually take from the Substack. And of course, the Substack will have all the news. I usually put it out on Sunday, so if you subscribe, you get a nice little digest of the news on Sunday. All right, so the first item of news, we're talking about the Armed Forces Day Test. The annual Armed Forces Day Test will be held on May 13th, 2023. The annual event is an opportunity for radio amateurs to communicate with and demonstrate interoperability between military communicators and amateur radio operators. This event is specifically authorized under FCC rules, Part 97.111A5. Amateur stations transmit on amateur frequencies and receive on military frequencies, while military stations do the opposite. More information, including a comprehensive list of stations, is available on, and there's a website, dodmars.org. That's dodmars.org. So this exercise is essentially, it is run by MARS, I believe, Military Affiliate Radio Service, Military Auxiliary Radio Service, I believe it's called now. And I have a nice interview with Ron Tomo, KE2UK, on the YouTube channel, if you could look for Mars. And we talk about the whole military radio services And these essentially were born out of the desire to create a wartime emergency amateur radio service. So they essentially got civilians, and of course, which civilians are better to do radio communications than radio amateurs? And we got civilians, radio amateurs, and trained them, and they did nets. And back in the day, they actually did phone patches for the troops. So you'd have like the troops overseas fighting, and then they would gather around the radio, and then they would set up phone patches and call home. It was always good to hear that. And that was a wonderful public service that we used to do. Of course, now in the era of satellite phones and internet and stuff like that, it's no longer really that much in demand, but still something we can do. I remember when my brother was in Afghanistan, he was still able to communicate back home to his wife, my sister-in-law, and the kids. So yeah, it was using their satellite internet connection. But this crossband test is, I guess it's more disaster focused because, like I mentioned, the interoperability, we can interoperate directly with federal government users, including disaster agencies and the military on 60 meters. So this kind of ties in to the whole thing, and it demonstrates why interoperability is very important, why we must retain that access. So I think it's a good thing. And of course, when the FCC opens comments, we should have that those comments in there. We want the 100 watts, right? We want the 100 watts. Okay, so the next story is about our friend Dave Kassler. So Dave Kassler's YouTube channel was hacked. Ham radio content creator Dave Kassler, KE0OG, is the latest victim of hacking and channel takeover by cryptocurrency scammers. On or around April 24th, Kassler's channel no longer had its videos visible and instead had a live stream of a cryptocurrency scam. Later on, YouTube took the channel down and cited violations of community guidelines. However, this termination may have been a result of Kassler or his followers reporting the hack to YouTube and them taking down the channel as a precautionary measure. Recently, Jim Heath, W6LG's channel, was also hacked, but fans were able to get it restored. Other high-profile channels, including several channels owned by Linus Media Group, Linus Tech Tips, and others, have also recently fallen victim to hacking. On April 26th, the channel was restored, but several videos had to either be re-uploaded or made visible again. So these hackers are getting pretty sophisticated. Some of them, they send emails and ask you and said, hey, we'll give you this product for free, just do a video. Or they said, we'll buy some advertising on your channel. And some of them is fake. I mean, some of them you actually see like the address is some address in Czech Republic or Russia or something, and they're scammers, they're scammers. But there's also hacks where they're actually taking over channels without even having to do that. They do something with some cookies or something like that, or session authentication, where they're able to just, take over channels. So it's the scary stuff. You never know if you're going to be the one to be targeted. I think YouTube definitely needs to take a closer look at this vector for hacking and see how best they could stop it, The others, the other channels, I mean, they're pretty big. They're pretty big tech channels, like Linus Tech Tips was hacked. And of course, other ham radio channels like Jim W6LG, he was hacked as well too. So just be careful out there, folks. And of course, if one of these channels do get hacked, you should report it. You shouldn't fall for any of their cryptocurrency scams or other such nonsense, because you'll end up just wasting your money and throwing your money away. Okay? So, all right. So that is that. Next, our friends at Oscar India. Oscar India hold a conference. So Oscar India is a very bright young upstart organization in eastern India. I've been doing some collaboration with them. They're very, they have a lot of educational videos. You can look for them, Oscar India, on YouTube. You can also see their website at beaham.in. That's beaham.in. And they are they're in Bengal, right? In Bengal, in India. I think that's where some of my ancestry is. I'm not 100% sure. I know they look like me, so it could be. And they have a lot of, stuff there. So the Open Source Convention for Amateur Radio India, Oscar India. And I will read this to you here. Let's see here. Where we go. Oh, yes. So Open Source Classes for Amateur Radio India, Oscar India, plans to hold a convention on 23rd to 24th September 2023 in Santiniketan, West Bengal. The theme will be Get on the Air. It is the first ham radio convention held in eastern India in recent years and will feature a fox hunt, CW contests, workshops, and tourism for non-ham spouses. Registration will be at beaham.in. And they have a flyer here. You can see it in the Substack. Open source save the date. And they have the highlights here. First ham radio convention in Eastern India in recent years. Focus on getting more hams on the air. Equipment and flea market. Radio spots, sports, fox hunt and CW contests. Equipment-oriented practical workshops. Ideal for beginner and novice hams. Tourism for XYLs and non-hams. Visit Santiniketan. And then send your suggestions to oscar.ismit. So that's AISMIT. That's AISMIT at gmail.com. There's also www.beaham.in. That's a website. To book space at the flea market, call 903-883-2819. I guess, and that's in India, so you gotta add the +91. So that's great. It's very nice to hear. And these guys, they have heart. So they're very enthusiastic hams. You should see this little girl, Aishi VU3OOS, Oscar Sierra. She's very enthusiastic. She's a young ham, and she's growing into the hobby, and she's very very enthusiastic. So, and of course, they've been producing more content. Next one is also nearby India. Updates from Lakshadweep Island, VU7W. So our friend Eurus, he is operating from, he's going to be concluding his operation at the time of this news. Operated from Kavrati in the Lakshadweep Islands using call sign VU7W. Activity was on 160 through 6 meters using CW, SSB, and FT8. The noise levels are high, making for challenging conditions, especially on the low bands. QSL via YL2GN. And Eurus also had a meeting with a local ham, Mr. Abu Bakr, VU3EBX. So he is there. Cool stuff. Really, really cool stuff. And you see these DXpeditions. So the last DXpedition I worked there was actually a VU7M. And they were like a little lighthouse operation. You had some Indian hams go there, and they activated this lighthouse. And they, they're very weak signals. I was one of like 300 from North America to work them. Very cool stuff. They were, and of course I think they took mostly public transport to get there. They took buses, and then they probably took a boat. They didn't fly anywhere. In India, some people are not rich in India. Right, they're some people are not very wealthy, so they have to make do with what they have. And always nice to hear that stuff. From what I gather, there's like all sorts of permits and stuff to get there. But anyway, Eurus had his he got a spider beam, and he put it on the roof of this little hotel, and he also had like a flag, and it looked like paradise. I mean, it's paradise in India, I guess. Very cool stuff. So next item of news is about QRZ.com. So any radio amateur knows about QRZ.com. QRZ.com essentially is a website that you can look up call signs. Like, for example, you type in N2RJ and you can see my bio, you can see my address to send me a QSL card, and so on. So amateur call sign database QRZ.com is celebrating 30 years of operation. 8 years ago, it started with an awards program and has since issued over 373,000 awards with over 736 million contacts hosted in QRZ logbooks. To commemorate this event, QRZ is offering a 30 Years of QRZ award. To obtain the award, one needs 30 contacts with other QRZ users. Once this is achieved, users may apply in the QRZ Logbook Awards portal. And they have more details and discussion at QRZ.com. Now, I will tell you this, that you must make actual contacts on the radio, okay? None of this online contact nonsense. You must make actual contacts on the actual radio. But the good news is past contacts will probably verify as well. So I put my logbooks in QRZ, and I was able to claim the award. I have almost every award that QRZ offers now. It is crazy. It's it's my QRZ profile is looking more like, I guess, like one of these military uniforms from some of these military leaders. But it's funny. But no, it's in all seriousness, I love operating, and it's good. There's also the DXpedition timeline. You can find it on the Substack, but you can also find it on dx-world.net, dx-world.net. They have a lot of the news you have coming up. You have in May, you have T30 UN. JD1 BMH will be active until the 5th of May. 5X2I and AQ7QB. DX0NE, 3D2LYC, 5UA99WS, and HK0-PY. I don't know, that one sounds like some sort of operation on Malpelo or something. CO0RRC, 9X2AW, and JE1 HX3-6. Later on the month, you have HQ7VJ from the Maldives, V47JA, and then VP2EAQ and VP2EAR, and then JW-SQ9CNN from Svalbard, and OJ0. There's an OJ0 operation, I guess, from Market Reef. That's a popular one that Marty Lane and company loves to activate as well. So that is some of the news and some of the DX news. And how do you like it? You can find more news at n2rj.substack.com. And in one of the previous Substacks, I also talked about dues increase at the ARL, but I'm not ready to talk about that yet. I'm going to save that for when the ARL brings out their survey. They are going to have a survey on May 1 about dues increase. And I'm not going to be talking politics about that, but I think you should at least answer the questions truthfully that they're going to ask. Okay? All right, so let's take a break and come right back, and we're going to do Q&A, which is one of your favorite segments from what I've heard. If it isn't, tell me otherwise. You can send your questions to ria@n2rj.com. This is Ria's Ham Shack right here on WRMI with the WRMI Legends. All the ways to listen to Ria's Ham Shack, let me count the ways. The first and the best way is, of course, on WRMI Legends 5050 on your shortwave dial and other frequencies as appropriate. You can also listen on the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can listen on WRMILegends.com where we have it on the live stream. You can catch it on Ria Ham Shack YouTube channel. Just look for youtube.com/@n2rj. I publish a show, and it's always a few days after it airs on WRMI Legends. And if you want to get the show first, you go on WRMI Legends 5050 shortwave or on WRMILegends.com. Of course, you can also go on WRMILegends.com to find out ways to support the show and support the station and to keep the tubes glowing and keep the fabulous shortwave programming coming. Now back to Ria's Ham Shack. So this is the segment you have been waiting for. It is the Q&A, questions and answers. And we are going to take your questions and we're going to give you some answers. You may send your questions to ria@n2rj.com, Romeo India Alpha @n2rj.com. Okay. And I will give you the best answers I can. And of course, this week we did celebrate the birthday of Samuel Morse. If you're into Morse code, that is your thing. I'm into Morse code, and I love the Morse code as well. All right, so let's take a couple questions here. The first one is, why do high-power amplifiers still use vacuum tubes? So this question was asked, why do high-power amplifiers still use vacuum tubes? And as you know, in shortwave radio, a lot of high-power transmitters, including these at Radio Miami International, use big vacuum tubes, and they use thousands of volts. They use a lot of electricity, too. So that's why you need to support the station at WRMILegends.com. Quick plug. But anyway, so you find even for amateur power levels at 1500 watts, a lot of people still like vacuum tubes, even though solid state is coming into the picture. I do have a solid state amplifier, but I've run many vacuum tube amplifiers here. And essentially it comes down to the power handling. So solid state devices, generally transistors and field effect transistors, FETs and such like that, they tend to operate within a very narrow range of the SWR. So they're pretty fragile. This is big due to the way they're constructed. I mean, they're semiconductors and they're in a small space, and the laws of thermodynamics come into play. They can only dissipate so much heat in that small space, and the SWR kicks back and can damage them. Vacuum tubes, on the other hand, are pretty rugged. They have a large space inside a vacuum. They run hot to begin with, so they're really not, they're not easily damaged by heat, although that doesn't mean you can't damage them. I mean, if you run too much voltage, you run too much drive power, you can heat those puppies up, those tubes up, and you can also cause arcing and such like that. And tubes also have gas in them. So tubes are still preferred for high power, even though there are solid state solutions. And what makes solid state possible too is there's a lot of protection circuitry around them. So you find that the amplifier will shut down at the drop of a hat. So your antenna system has to be well matched. So that's pretty much it. I mean, the other thing is tubes. Well, a lot of tubes are cheaper, and the reason is because a lot of them are kind of like, it's old technology. The manufacturing is not that complicated. I mean, you deal with big pieces of metal, and a lot of factories in China are making tubes. I mean, let's face it. I mean, today a lot of our tubes come from China. They come from old surplus in Russia and other places, and Eastern Europe. So they're generally that's where they come from. But there are some outfits in the United States who are starting to manufacture tubes, and some that remanufacture tubes as well. So there you have it. I mean, it couldn't be more simpler than that. Use tubes because they're rugged. And the thing about tubes as well is that tubes have a very narrow impedance range. So essentially, you have to have a proper tuned circuit, in front of the tube, so they have a very narrow bandwidth. Whereas with some solid-state devices, you could feed them anything, and they will just eat it up. Like the LDMOS, the laterally diffuse metal oxide semiconductor, which is the type of amplifier I have. Now, the other thing about tubes is that tubes could produce a very clean signal, because tubes have such a narrow bandwidth range, so they produce a very clean signal, and as such they're preferred. It's a lot easier to get a nice clean signal out of a tube than it is to solid state. All right, and this question here is, has anyone used APRS to track weather balloons? I'm a total noob and trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of how to go about doing this. Well, of course, I mean, it's one of the famous things that hams do is we track weather balloons. And we track weather balloons because, well, it's we use something called APRS essentially. And APRS stands for Automatic Packet Reporting System, and APRS helps us track objects that are moving, like vehicles and pedestrians. But a lot of people actually put APRS trackers on balloon, and W5KUB is one of the people who does that, and he seems to be focused a lot on that for some reason lately. But a lot of other people do it, and remember I talked about a few episodes ago where China was shooting down our balloons, and one that might have been a ham radio balloon. But yeah, so yep, we do that. Don't shoot us, okay? What can I say? But yeah, so it's perfectly suited for that. But I mean, you're not putting a whole radio on it, right? You use like a small circuit board, and you have it's essentially something called pico ballooning, where you have a very small circuit board and it's powered by a solar panel. I don't even think they use a battery. I think it's just directly powered by solar. Is one of the things I want to get into. So that's gonna be interesting. Here's an interesting one. Does the coax play a part in tuning of an antenna? Does the length of the coax have a tuning effect on an end-fed half wave? I know the longer the coax, the more transmit signal loss you get, but does coax length figure into tuning to resonance, right? And this is an interesting question. So my friend Jim Aspinwall, NO1PC, he actually answered this. He said, it should not, but depending on your quote-unquote end-fed half-wave construction, the coax may unfortunately become part of the antenna, and could also be allowing RF to feed back into your station. So I think this is an important thing. I mean, in some cases, inadvertently, your coax could become part of the antenna. Particularly the shield could have common mode currents on it, and the shield essentially becomes a return path, which is why I really doubt antennas that say that you don't need a counterpoise, you don't need radials. That's horse pucky, because the thing is that the coax is acting as the counterpoise, and you definitely want to stay away from that kind of arrangement. You want to put a separate counterpoise so you're guaranteed to have a return path. But in the unfortunate event that your antenna is so poorly designed that your coax is part of the antenna, yes, the length will affect it. And if the length is affecting it, then you probably have a problem that you need to look at. You probably want to put a feed line choke, or you probably want to switch to another type of antenna. I really recommend, the NFED is such a fad. I mean, even the ARL is making the NFED now, and I like NFEDs for some things, but I think as an antenna design, it gets on this trend bandwagon that people ride on, and it's notorious for causing common mode current, right? Especially if it's not correctly installed. So the correct installation, you must have the counterpoise, and you must have a 1-to-1 current balun connected between the 49-to-1 transformer and the coax, and that's it. So you must have those. Otherwise, you're going to have problems galore. So here's an interesting question. Dave Mose asked here, a recent post showed a Jeep Easter egg footrests, and he asked, did any ham gear makers put Easter eggs in their rigs, like hit right buttons and suddenly the screen plays a game? He remembers Microsoft Word 95 had a thesaurus we typed in, I had to kill Bill Gates, would offer alternative phrase, I'll drink to that. Oh my. Yeah, people have their opinion of Mr. Gates, right? But if you hit the right combination of buttons, well, I haven't seen any of these. I think some software might have it, but no, I haven't seen any of these. In these radios, I mean, they're already stuffed to the gills with their programming and such. So I don't know. If anybody encounters one, please email me, ria@n2rj.com, and you can actually, I'll mention it on the show because I've never seen one, and I've seen some complicated radios like the new Icoms and Kenwoods, and it would be nice if you have that. So, yeah. Dan Smith asks, I have a question for all the extra class license holders. What made you want to get the extra class license? The extra class license is pretty much the end of it all. I mean, once you're done, and you don't have to go back in front of the FCC unless they have reason to believe that you fraudulently obtained your license. There were some hams in Puerto Rico who actually got caught up in that, and I'm sure there are in other parts of the United States, but that's beside the point. The point is, once you get your extra, you're pretty much done. You're not going to have to do anything more. You have full privileges. The only thing you need to watch out for is these band segments that we have between phone, digital, and Morse code, CW. Once you have your extra, you're done. I mean, you're not going to do that. The other thing that extra allows you to do, it allows you to basically be a volunteer examiner for technicians, general, and extra. You know, if you're a technician, you can't be any sort of volunteer examiner at all. If you are a general, you can only test technicians. If you're an extra, you can test everybody up to extra because there's nothing higher than extra. So you become a volunteer examiner, you can actually test anybody. So this is a great reason to become an extra. It's a great reason to give back. The other reason I mentioned some time back, and I'm going to be using this in Europe. Well, I'll be using my UK license in Europe. The other thing is that you don't have to, you will have full privileges under the CEPT in Europe. So you'll be able to use full privileges in Europe. Yeah. And because Europe actually doesn't really recognize, a lot of countries in Europe don't actually recognize the technician or even general class license as anything but a novice type license. You have to be either extra or advanced. I mean, if you had the advanced license, yeah, you're recognized. Some weird reason they do that as well. So that's a great reason. Other reasons, I mean, it kind of as well, you know, you're viewed as an expert, so to speak, in ham radio. Another reason too that's often overlooked is you get to pick a shorter call sign. Like I have N2RJ, which obviously is a vanity call sign, but as a general, you can't get these shorter call signs. The shortest ones you could get is a 1x3, like W1ABC or something like that, right? Or you have these dreadfully long call signs like Kilo Charlie 2 Zulu Yankee Mike or something like that. So this is it's a really long call sign. If you're contesting or DXing, if it could be a lot to say, but you know what? A lot of people like their call signs, and they're not. If you love your call sign, you love your call sign. I just wanted something shorter because I wanted to go into pileups and actually go rapid fire, right? Like a lot of people go rapid fire. So here's a question, and it's more of a discussion. Let's say you buy a home and you find an antenna in the attic. Is it typically a ham antenna? Is it a CB antenna? Or is it a TV antenna? Well, 9 times out of 10, it's probably going, unless you bought from a ham, it is going to be a TV antenna. And you typically know the TV antennas, not so much from the antenna design, but from the type of cable it's attached to. Usually you'll see a 75 ohm F connector, the basically screw-on antenna connector, or the cable type connector for cable TV attached onto the antenna. Some of them use, the really old ones use the TV 300 ohm twin lead, which is basically 2 wires in parallel, and insulator is plastic. Other types of antennas, you might see like a crossed, 2 crossed folded trombone style antennas. That's usually FM radio. and that one might have coax or twin lead attached to it. Commonly, a lot of people didn't have good FM reception in their area, so they put an FM antenna in the attic, or they even put it on the roof, and they attach it to an FM receiver, and they're able to receive crystal clear FM, and that was great. But if it's a ham antenna, you might find, the type of coax, and not only type of coax, but type of connector. If you know what a PL259 connector is, those are most commonly used for ham radio. You will usually see one of those. You might see an N connector, right? And those are typically thicker. They're wider than the typical TV antenna and FM antenna connectors. So those are what you look forward to. And if you find an old antenna, it might be a gift, because even if it's a receive only antenna, you could probably cut that up and make a ham antenna. Because I'm not really into, I'm into TV reception, but I'm not into people's old TV antennas. I could use that, unless it's something like a Channel Master 4251, which is like the big dish UHF antenna. But this is kind of like, if it's like a regular TV antenna, I'm just going to cut that up and make a ham antenna. Now, Juan Antonio asks, he said, I apologize for the ignorant question, but I'm studying for my tests. I've seen plenty of information about ham being great for emergencies. However, in my studies, I've seen the equipment. Repeaters take power. If we lose power, wouldn't ham be useless? I'm clearly missing something. So again, apologies. Well, that's a very valid point, and I do think that a lot of hams fall into the trap of thinking that, I'm going to get a Baofeng, I'm going to get on a repeater, and I'm going to save the world. That's not how it works. Yes, repeaters are important. Repeaters are very important for emergency communications, and other infrastructure is important, but in the end, they are just infrastructure. As a radio amateur, if you are interested in emergency preparation, whether it's to help out your local served agencies in a disaster, or you're interested in your own personal communications, what you want to do is beef up your simplex capability. Now, simplex is essentially radio to radio, directly radio to radio. You're not using repeaters. You're going radio to radio. And the way you do this is you have to make sure your antenna capability is better. So this means that you might have to install an antenna on your roof. You might have to put up a tower or some other support structure and get on simplex. And this is VHF and UHF. Now, another thing you can do is some radios have what you call a crossband repeater function, which is where you put the radio receives on one band and then transmits on the other. And with that, you're able to use a repeater that's controlled by you. It's not on some remote mountaintop or something. And you can power that with your emergency power source, whether it be generator, batteries, solar, or whatever. And you're able to use that and have that at your disposal. Hams have even gotten creative. They've elevated the crossband repeater with a drone. And by elevating it with a drone, they can get some height and get some more range. Now, the next level, you want to try to get on HF. And HF is a different ball game, because HF, you're 99% of the time, you are using simplex communication, radio to radio. The only difference is that you're not actually, in a lot of times, you're not really going direct radio to radio as in line of sight. You actually bounce your signals off of the Earth's ionosphere, which is an upper layer of the atmosphere, which is charged by the radiation of the sun. And essentially, if you are a shortwave listener, you already know that, okay? You probably know a lot more about it than I'm telling you. But as a shortwave listener, you know that you receive signals from many different parts of the world. And of course, HF communication, you're using the shortwave. So you definitely want to listen on HF, and you want to be able to transmit on HF. And this means, unfortunately, in the United States, you should get a general class or higher license. Although you do have some basic HF privileges with a technician license, you really don't have that much. I mean, you have 10-meter voice, and then you have the rest, which is Morse code. And a lot of people don't care to learn Morse code these days, so they're up a creek without a paddle. And all they're left is with 10 meters, and 10 meters, while it's a great band, is generally not open except at the peak of the sunspot cycle. Luckily, we are near the peak right now, and we're getting a lot of propagation on 10 meters, but it's not reliably open. So you're probably better off with a general license and getting on 20 meters, 40 meters, 80 meters, or even one of the work bands like 17 meters. And there's also digital communication. You know, you can send and receive messages with various systems, like WinLink is one of them, where you can send email using VARA, and you can use that for emergencies. You can get on all sorts of other things, like JS8 Call allows you to do text chats. You can even use Olivia, PSK31, and all sorts of different modes to get on the air. So that is essentially how you do it. And ham radio communications, the beauty of ham radio communications is that we have so much spectrum available to us that you need to use, otherwise we might lose it. And that includes bands like 60 meters, you know. And repeaters are just one way to get into ham radio. And yeah, so the next question is, Bruce says here, I bumped into another ham this morning who also got his novice ticket at age 11. And in fact, he's met quite a few who got started at age 11. But he's never got around to anybody who started at age 10 or younger. Is there a reason for that? Did the FCC require age 11? Well, you know, I don't think there was a limit. I think what happened was that at age 11, you kind of have the, you know, your brain is developed to kind of absorb the material at that time. I know there are some kids who do it, but like kids like, you know, younger than 10, like 6 or 7 years old, who do it, and they're able to get their license earlier. But most kids, you know, they get into it around the minimum time. Another thing is that scouting. So scouting actually has a huge radio connection, and scouts were encouraged to get ham radio licenses, and at the camporee and such like that. And then, of course, you know, you had to learn the Morse code too, and scouts used to teach you the Morse code. Now, in other countries outside of the United States, what would happen is that some countries did have a minimum age. Some of them 18, some of them 21, some of them 13. I believe in the United Kingdom it was 13. So it was. There definitely are some areas of the world with different age. So yeah. So Sean asks here, a new tech working on my general. I'm looking to add a base radio to replace my HT that I'm currently using as a quote-unquote base radio. He's limited on space, so he's thinking an all-in-one unit. And he's looking at the Yaesu 991. Okay. So the 991 is a nice radio. I think it's you know, there are pros and cons to having these all-band radios. I'm an ICOM fan, so I have an ICOM 7000, you know, I played around with the 706, ICOM 706, so it's good. The 991 is a good radio. The only thing is that there are a few caveats with these all-in-one radios. One of them is that if one side fails, your whole radio fails, and you're essentially out of luck until your radio gets repaired. The other one is that sometimes you can't listen to HF and VHF at the same time. So some of them you might be able to, some of them you cannot. Right? It is, you know, that is an option. But yeah, and sometimes what you might do is, even if you get these all mode radios, you might probably pick up like a cheap little mobile radio, probably an Alinco or an ICOM or a Kenwood or a Yaesu or something. And Main Trading Company, who is a sponsor of the Legends, they have a lot of great radios. You can check them out at mtcradio.com. You can, there are a lot of different radios you can get. So generally, and these radios are so small, you can mount them in your shack without taking up much space at all. All right, and that's the end of Q&A. So my final thoughts, back to our original topic on 60 meters. Many have said, well, we don't use the band. The band is useless. The band is channels. Well, as it turns out, we're getting a continuous allocation now. So that's no longer an excuse. And use it or lose it, because generally, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I encourage everybody to use the band to their best ability. Most modern rigs support it. And I really think that if you have a chance just to go on and probably call CQ, probably talk with some friends, or if you're interested in emergency communications, see if there's any sort of local emergency communications organizations you can get involved with, like your local RACES or your local ARIES or your local radio clubs that are doing drills on the band. And you can definitely make the most out of it. And, a lot of de-expeditions are actually making contacts on the band as well. So, that's another avenue, or at least put up a dipole, or you tune one of your other antennas and see how far you could get out. You might be surprised. When we do get the continuous allocation, because it is certain that we're going to get this continuous allocation, well, at least in FCC time, I don't know how long they're going to take. You might want to probably try tuning around and see where you make contacts. I don't think that this allocation is going to be segmented like our legacy bands, like our other bands, like the 40 and 80 meters. I don't think it's going to be segregated by mode. I do think naturally we're going to have some centers of activity on it. I do think that, I think FT8 might end up picking a spot on there. I would like to see them, at least pick a spot away from the channels so that we have some activity that is pretty much out of the government's hair and a space just for us, quote unquote, hobbyists. And what I would also like to see is probably tell your friends to use the band. That is definitely how you do it. Each one reach one. One of my friends on another podcast, another radio show, he says each one reach one, and that's how you get activism going. Activism is not a bad word. It's how we get things done, and it's how we keep our hobby vibrant and growing. Well, this has been another week of Ria's Ham Shack here on WRMI Legends, and would like to thank everybody at WRMI, and we have Jeff White and his crew, his entire crew keeping the station going, keeping the tubes glowing there. Also Ted Randall and Holly and Jeff Lawrence and all the DJs at WRMI Legends. And of course, next you'll hear some music if you are listening on WRMI. If you're not listening on WRMI, why don't you give us a listen on the radio? We are on every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central, which right now in summertime is 2100 UTC. I believe we're on another frequency on WRMI, which is 5950. That is subject to change. Of course, that helps with the propagation, because early in the evening, there really isn't much good propagation, at least not to my neck of the woods. There might be some south of me. I know a lot of people give reception reports. Anyway, send your reception reports to P.O. Box 73, Sussex, New Jersey, 07461, USA. That's P.O. Box 73, Sussex, New Jersey, 07461. And until next time, I will say peace and 73. And wherever you are in the world, keep on hamming. Ria out.